I'm Carolyn Van Slyck. I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft, and I'm a chair for SIG Service Catalog, which is part of Kubernetes. One sec. There we go. What I just want to let you know is what we're going to cover today, because it's kind of ambiguous. You're like, intro to Service Catalog, what are we going to talk about? One is just, I want to be able to answer questions about this group. This isn't just like I'm going to stand up here and talk and be like, you listen and you leave after 30 minutes. I really want to engage with you. So if you would like to become a user of Service Catalog, you already are, and you want to tell me about everything you hate. Maybe you'd like to meet some of the other maintainers who are up here in the front row, and then just kind of see a demo of Service Catalog and figure out if you want to get involved. So if that's not what you were thinking it was going to be, no, it's cool to just wander off. But otherwise, I hope you stay. So how many people are using or have used Service Catalog already? Excellent. OK. How many people are in a SIG already and know what a SIG is? OK. And who's from another SIG and showed up just because they want to know what it is we're doing in Service Catalog? All right, cool. For everyone who just raised their hands for that last one, most of the information that you really want is going to be at the deep dive on Thursday, and I'm going to have more information about that. OK, so for people who aren't familiar with special interest groups or SIGs, it's a formal way for us inside of Kubernetes to get together and kind of figure out how to solve big problems in Kubernetes. OK. So there's SIG applications, there's like SIG networking, and we have SIG Service Catalog. We have a formal charter, and it describes how we operate, who can participate, and what's kind of within the scope of our SIG. And so the scope for our SIG Service Catalog is taking the Open Service Broker API and making it available inside of Kubernetes. And I'll get into more what the Open Service Broker API is. We're a group of people, not just companies. So if you're an individual and you just want to be able to hang out with us and figure out how to use it and hack on the weekends or every other 6 months, you're still welcome. You don't have to be at like some big company or have this be your full-time job to hang out with us. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go over what is Service Catalog for people who aren't familiar. So like I said, it's the Open Service Broker API. That's what we're involved with trying to make available inside of Kubernetes. And what this is an API that describes there's all these managed services that your cloud providers offer, like MySQL as a service, Redis as a service. I love databases, so that'll be all my explanations, but there's way more you can do with it. And Cloud Foundry, which is another platform out there, came up with a way to make it possible to connect all of those cloud services into your platform in a standard way, so that when you're talking and saying, I'd like to provision a database, I'd like to provision a message queue, it's the same service calls, it's consistent, so that we can have this work across vendors, across platforms. So people who have brokers is Google, Microsoft, Amazon. IBM has a ton, and a whole lot more people have made their own and contributed it to the ecosystem. The deep dive is going to go in depth as to what the API looks like and how it interacts. All we care about is that it gives us the ability to hook up all those great things that we don't want to manage. We don't want to do MySQL backups. We don't want to figure out how to do upgrades or maintain these things. State is hard. And how do we bring that inside of Kubernetes and have a native experience for being able to spin up these services and connect them to our applications? So here's a couple examples of what type of services. Like I'll talk about databases all the time because as an application developer, that's what I'm most familiar with. But it could be anything. It really doesn't matter. You could make a broker that knows how to talk to your smoker and give you information about what's going on and fire it up. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can interact with the real world or with clouds, and on-premise providers even could set up their own things as well. But for the most part, anything with state. That's what we like to offload our clusters. So oftentimes, as soon as I explain what Service Catalog is, people go, why are we doing this again? Why do we need this? So I'd like to do just a quick little experiment of if you didn't have something like Service Catalog or other alternatives, like it's not the only way to do it, it's just it's a way to do it inside of Kubernetes without leaving the Kubernetes tooling, is that, let's say I want to make a database and hook it up to WordPress inside of my Kubernetes cluster. If I don't have something like Service Catalog, I need to go to the portal for GKE or Azure or whatever, or go to one of the separate command line tools, or use Terraform or something else. And then I need to somehow get the credentials or the way to access and interact with whatever service I just created back inside of Kubernetes to be able to use it. So there's this weird disjointed experience, and you're writing a lot of glue code at that point. And also, if I do that, Kubernetes still has no way to interact with whatever was there. I can talk to the database and connect as a user, but what happens when I need to upgrade? What happens when I want it to go away? What if I want to change service levels because all of a sudden I need to scale up and I need a big, beefier database? I need to go back to the console, go back to the portal, type it all in again, upgrade, maybe sync the credentials back, whatever. And it's kind of a manual, it's why we have DevOps. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. The second question a lot of people have, though, is like, operators are really cool. Half the talks here are about operators. Why aren't we doing that instead? So the problem we're trying to solve of connecting a platform, Kubernetes, to whatever your underlying source of managed services are, like your cloud provider, it's not a unique problem that we're trying to solve. If every single operator individually tried to solve it for themselves, every time you use a different one, you have to do something different. You have to relearn their system. And each one will have different sets of capabilities, which is kind of frustrating. It's not easy to do. I don't want to spend my time reading documentation. The other part of this is that the source of the Open Service Broker API came from Cloud Foundry. And because of that, there is an entire marketplace and ecosystem full of existing brokers that you can immediately use. I don't want to have to rewrite an operator for one of these services if it already exists somewhere else. I don't want to have to do all that logic. So operators are cool. I'm not hating on them, but they don't quite solve the problem for everyone and give us a consistent experience. So I'd like to demo Service Catalog now. Sorry about this. Mirroring. There we go. So there's a couple different ways to interact with Service Catalog. It's something that is installed into your cluster, okay? And you can work with it using QC ETL. And I can just type in cluster service brokers, okay? And I have one broker installed. A broker is something that is capable of interacting with this underlying system that can provision services for me. For the sake of bandwidth, demo time, and not charging any money, there's a little demonstration broker called MiniBroker that runs really nicely on any cluster, especially Minikube. And it lets me provision things that don't cost any money and just run on the cluster itself. It lets you simulate how to work with Service Catalog. So QC ETL is cool, but that was one way to interact with it, and it's not domain specific. So sometimes it's easier to be able to work with things using the terminology that you think about it and have it be optimized for what you're trying to do. So we have a command line tool, SVCAT, a little bit shorter, and it'll show you similar information, and here I can see my broker. And it supports pretty much all the commands that kubectl does. But again, it's optimized for showing you the information that you're probably most interested in. So I'm going to describe my MiniBroker. And so a couple pieces of information here that's interesting is mostly the URL. Your broker doesn't have to be on your Kubernetes cluster. It could be somewhere else. You could host a broker in your on-premise installation and have all your various Kubernetes clusters point to it. But at the end of the day, what it's doing is connecting Kubernetes to that API and be able to say, make me services, bind to them, give me credentials. So the first thing I always wonder is, like, what can I do with a broker when I have it? So we have the marketplace command. This lists out all the various things that you could provision onto your Kubernetes cluster, use with your Kubernetes cluster. In the case of MiniBroker, they're provisioned onto the cluster. Most production-grade brokers will be provisioning them somewhere else as a managed service for you. So here we have MariaDB, MongoDB, all sorts of different versions. And so let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing here. Is services kind of get grouped into classes, which is a related set of things like MySQL, a Rabbit message queue, things like that. And then there's different service plans. Sometimes it boosts how much memory and things you have available to you. It could be like gold level premier service with SLAs. It's whatever that broker decides to expose to you and make available to you. So I'd like to do MySQL. So I'm going to provision MySQL, and I'm going to call it MyDB. And I'm going to use the 574.14. That went very quickly because it's happening on the cluster. If you were provisioning something in the cloud, especially if it was super beefy and they're spinning up a lot of resources for you, this could take a little bit of time. But it's in here. So let's take a look at my instance, MyDB. There we go. So you can see the status. It was already provisioned successfully. It gives you a little bit of information about what namespace it was deployed into and what was the class and plan. There's nothing attached to it right now at the moment, though. So there's this concept of I make a service instance, okay, MySQL. But I could have 5, 6, 100 different applications and microservices that want to be able to connect to it and get credentials for it and be able to interact with it. So it's a two-step process. You create an instance, or you provision the instance, and then you bind your application to it. So let's make a binding. So I'm going to bind MyDB here. There's a lot of other parameters and things I could specify, but let's be simple. Doot, doot, doot. And let's take a look at what that actually made. There we go. So I have a binding to my service, and this doesn't just happen inside of Kubernetes. When I create this binding, just like when I made the instance, it talked to the broker, and it made a database, and then came back and said, all right, great, we've got a database ready to roll for you. When I do a bind, it goes off again, talks to the broker, and says, hey, I want to be able to create a connection to this database, and it can return to me credentials to connect to it. Depending on how your broker is configured and set up, like what Azure does, for example, is we'll give you unique credentials for every binding so that each microservice is connecting with a different set of usernames and passwords. And what it does, what Service Catalog does, is after you've created that binding, we needed a way to connect your application to this service that we provisioned now. And what we do is we create a new secret for you. So I have a secret here. The name of the secret is MyDB, because I'm not being creative. And inside of that secret are a whole bunch of different information that you can use to connect to it. My favorite is just using the URI. And now this secret data that's coming back isn't always standardized. Some of it looks the same between different clouds. Sometimes it doesn't. That's one of the challenges that we're working on in Service Catalog, actually, is making it so that you could connect to a database that was made on IBM for MySQL and connect to a database that was made on Azure or GKE or Amazon and be able to still rely on using the same keys in this secret. So that's how it works. And I showed you everything inside of SVCAT. But again, I just want to stress that this is all actually standard Kubernetes under the hood. So let's use QC ETL again. Let's do If I wanted to, I could completely ignore SVCAT and just use QC ETL to interact with it. But as you notice, it's a little bit more verbose. It's basically just dumping out all the information, whether or not they may be relevant to you. So when would you use one versus the other? I'm a developer on Service Catalog, and I'm constantly trying to just one-off make test data or see what's available or troubleshoot and dig in. In that case, the SVCAT tool is super useful to me because it's showing stuff that's targeted to what I'm interested in. But let's say, for example, that I finally have figured it all out, and I'm trying to package and deploy my application and move it from dev to test to production. At that point, I'd probably be using something else to orchestrate this whole thing, and I'd be using YAML and manifest, maybe Helm templates, and things like that to be able to create all of these things. If you go to the deep dive, we will go more in depth on what the various resources are that Service Catalog uses to manage all of this. But just for the intro, I mean, the whole idea is just that I want to be able to connect to services in the cloud, bring it into my Kubernetes cluster, and not have to worry about all the details in between. So, Oh, I just give up, guys. I'm sorry. We're all trying here. Cool. So that deep dive is on Thursday in 2AB, which I have no clue where it is. But Jonathan right here will be going into a whole bunch of different things. We'll be talking about what is the architecture of Service Catalog, giving you enough information to understand what it is that makes it tick under the hood and how we kind of put it together. Some of the warts, too, and more information on how you could actually contribute and get involved. Because sometimes it's kind of hard. You're like, yeah, this sounds really cool. I want to contribute, but I actually don't know what the pieces are, how to get in, anything like that. So Jonathan's going to give you a lot more information on what the underlying architecture is, what are the components, and how do they all fit together. He'll be going into some of the tips, tricks, and gotchas of just understanding the domain of Service Catalog as well. And then also getting into what are we going to do in the future. What I've shown you here is the most simple case, right? But we put a whole bunch of new features out this year that go from being a toy and kind of like, yeah, we've demonstrated how to do this, to being able to actually securely operate this in production and be able to manage it for more than just the first day, but the second day, a year later. How do I keep working with this? How do I manage large multi-tenant clusters where I need to be able to isolate the services I'm making, isolate the brokers, things like that? So he'll get into all that sort of good stuff. What I'm really here today for, to be honest, is we're in a rebuilding year with the catalog. We definitely have core people who are available all the time, but we want new contributors. There's a lot of surface area, new features, and not enough developers to make this happen. So if you are even slightly interested, I highly encourage you to introduce yourself to one of us after this and go, hey, I want to get involved. Where do I start? We've worked with SIG contributor experience to pilot a lot of the help wanted and good first issue labeling and giving you everything you need to be able to jump in without actually knowing what Service Catalog is and having a path to gradually learn it. If you're not familiar with Kubernetes, maybe you're even new to Go, that's okay. Please come on in. And we have paths that go from someone who knows nothing about Kubernetes, nothing about Service Catalog, to becoming a contributor, to going on to becoming a maintainer, and even a chair. I started on Service Catalog last year in December, and I'd used Service Catalog this much. I've used Kubernetes this much and a ton of Go, so I had at least had that leg up. And now I'm a chair. So we definitely don't have this like Illuminati glass ceiling where you can't come in. If you're interested in being a cool, important person who wants to do fun stuff with Kubernetes, we have space for you. I am cool. Don't laugh at me. Okay. So here's some of the things I'm going to try to like pull you in with and make you excited to join us. Jonathan's going into this a little bit, but we don't use CRDs. Our product has been around for a while. We were pre-CRD, okay? And so we use a different way to store all of our data and provide APIs to interact with Service Catalog. But we'd really like to use CRDs. We don't have enough time and people to really dig into this and maybe contribute a bit upstream to CRDs to make fill in the last gaps. A ton has gone in this year, so we're so close. But we need someone who's totally interested in taking it, prototyping it, and then pushing it through and making it a real thing. So if you want to be able to lead a project, that's a big opportunity we have, and you'd be able to jump in and own it. Another large opportunity that we have is I've been collaborating with SIG Apps and Matt Farina to kind of improve the user experience for all of this. Service Catalog works really well when you're, say, I have a cluster and I just live on one provider and I always provision Azure MySQL instances or Amazon RDS, and all the parameters I have and everything that I know to fine tune it and get it working just right works perfectly on that cloud provider. But if I want to be able to move it somewhere else, or maybe I wanted to move from Minikube on my local laptop with MiniBroker level resources that use different tweaks and configuration and parameters, it's kind of rocky. You have to maintain dual manifests, and if you're using Helm, you've got a bunch of if statements everywhere to kind of make it work. And what we'd like to do is make it a lot easier for you to have portable access to your services, being able to provision them, interact with them, upgrade, downgrade, just see and work with them, and make it more developer friendly. We've made something with Service Catalog that if you're a DevOpsy person who isn't afraid of YAML, you can do what you need to do. It totally works. But if you'd like to just be able to use it and focus on your domain, say application development, and then be able to move it around to different places, we're kind of missing the mark on the user experience. So we have a KEP, Kubernetes enhancement proposal out there that was just merged, I think a week and a half ago, to work with SIG Apps to make something that's portable so I can move it around. And we need developers. And no one else has figured out how this is going to work. So you could come in and not have to deal with existing code, things like that. It would be really fun to be able to jump in and be able to work on things in the API, the CLI, back-end control loops and all the fun race conditions that can happen on that side. And just really improve the user experience. That's what I'm totally interested in. That's what I'll be working on next year. So if you'd like to join me, we really need people. So there's a couple of resources to have available for you. SVCAT.io will have our developer guide, more information and demos and walkthroughs so you can actually try this out on your computer. You don't need a big cloud account. You can try this all for free using, we have a little demo broker, and there's MiniBroker as well. If you'd like to know what brokers are out there, it isn't just the big clouds. There's other people as well who have brokers, and everyone's free to register a broker with our big list right here. And if you'd like more information on MiniBroker, and maybe you'd like to help work on it, because we do still have work on that, it's kind of how we do all of our demos. So if you want to do something highly visible that maybe isn't as scary as working on the back end of Kubernetes, that's another cool place to hang out. That's really it. I'm hoping with any of the rest of the time, we can just chat, maybe do some Q&A. Jonathan? Does anyone have any questions?
Does the SIG own the brokers as well? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question.
Sorry, just want to know, does the SIG own the brokers as well, or just the core API? And I guess, is there a controller behind it?
Yeah, so our SIG does not own brokers. I wrote MiniBroker, and so I kind of control that. But IBM has written a slew of brokers, and that's all theirs. And Azure has brokers, et cetera. And each one of those, the way we make them play nice is through the OSB API. They all have to adhere to that, and then we don't have to worry about who wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah, so quick question, just to confirm that I understood it correctly. So when you bind your service, you actually create a secret? Or did you actually bind it to an application? That went a bit fast in the demo.
Oh, sorry, yeah. We can create a new secret or use an existing one, and it'll pack in all the data that came back from the broker. Sometimes it's database connection info. It could be dashboard information, say that you deployed something that has a visual GUI somewhere else. Whatever it is that's important to be able to interact with that is being put into that secret.
But it's not like in Cloud Foundry bind to an application and then already attached to the environment variable.
Can you answer that, Jonathan?
Yeah, so currently you are correct. We don't attach it to a running pod or deployment. That's a feature we know users are definitely interested in. It's something we're working on, but that's one of those things that's going to require changes upstream in mainline Kubernetes. So there is a current work being done on that to implement a feature called pod presets, but that's sort of a future plan.
So for now, it's a matter of mapping your secret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you good? Yeah. Okay.
Hello. I was curious if you see the implementation of brokers being more picked up by the service providers themselves or community-driven efforts for brokers.
I would say that if you're provisioning services directly off of a cloud provider like Amazon or IBM or something like that, they're really the ones owning it. Some of them are open source, like the Azure one is open source. But if you're interested, you can usually contribute to them. But the day-to-day decisions and people saying whether or not something's worth maintaining or accepting is going to come from them. But there are community brokers, like MiniBroker is an example of that. There could be cool stuff that like, you could connect brokers to IoT. You could connect brokers to home automation and things like that. And that's where you could see more community stuff if you have neat ideas. For example, in KubeCon Europe, Scott demonstrated how to like connect all the lights in his house and turn things on and off using Service Catalog. That would be something where none of the vendors care, and you should totally try that out and do something with it.
I can also offer some more information on that. So from my experience, there tend to be roughly 3 categories of brokers that I see like actually in the wild. The first category would be like main platform providers. So I work for IBM. We provide a whole bunch of brokers on our Kubernetes platforms that we wrote, provision our own resources. The second case is we also have a lot of like third-party vendors that offer their services via the OSB API. So like this is a company that sells managed database solutions, and they have a broker that lives on the internet somewhere that you can hook up your platform to, and they sell their stuff through it. The third category is there are actually some community-maintained brokers. So I used to contribute a lot to Cloud Foundry, so that's mostly what I have experience with. But they maintain several reference implementations of like MySQL broker that they maintain. It's an open source project that adheres to the thing, but it like actually works. It's a production-ready thing that you can deploy and use with your own platform. Okay, so does that answer your question? Cool. We had somebody
Up here?
So you talked a lot about service catalogs and brokers, and also we saw the marketplace in the CLI. Is there any plan to one, add a UI to this service catalog, and two, to add queuing within the service catalog as well when something gets executed?
For that second part, can you repeat that? The QA? Sorry.
To add a queue to the actual ordering of services within Kubernetes.
So if there was dependencies that need to...
Yeah, for example, approvals of governance flows like within the actual service catalog.
Oh. I've never heard that suggestion before.
So there are some brokers in the wild today that work like that. However, that logic has to be implemented on the broker side. Various permissions and things like, are you allowed to provision this service? Are you allowed to delete this thing? But that's sort of handled on the broker end, and Service Catalog doesn't interact with it directly at this time.
There we go. There is a user interface for working with Service Catalog. This is something that Bitnami has worked on quite a bit, and they have this really slick, let's see if we can make this ginormous, a really slick looking dashboard that you can see, basically the equivalent of that marketplace command. It shows you all the different classes that you can create, and there's just like a visual like WYSIWYG basically. You can click on what you want to be able to create. It'll ask you for any parameters that you need to put in there, maybe the name of the database or more connection information, things like that, and then it'll actually provision it for you.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Sorry, I'm just going around the room as quick as I can.
Hi. So following up on that last question, can you tie in like native Kubernetes RBAC into who can provision resources via Service Catalog? And then follow-up question would be, is there an audit trail of who's done what?
Yeah. So I would really like that to be a thing. Diving in a little bit to why we don't have that now and what we do have. So we don't use a resource per type of thing, type of service that you could create. So there isn't a resource called MySQL or something like that. We have one resource called service instance. And RBAC operates on those resources. So we can say whether or not someone in a namespace, for example, can create resources, can bind a service to their application, and say maybe they can create them but not delete them, things like that. And we also have built into Service Catalog as a new feature is catalog restrictions. An operator can say that I'm going to install catalog here inside this namespace, but it's just for my devs, and I don't want them to spend too much money. So I can limit them to just certain classes or types of plans that are on the cheaper side. But we don't have the ability to just say, like, you can create this, but not this. If we move to CRDs, and we've had a couple prototypes on that, we'd be able to have a more native RBAC experience. I don't know if, Jonathan, you have more thoughts on that?
No, like she said, I'm going to cover some of this in my deep dive session on Thursday, I guess it is. Yeah, we can't restrict at the global resource level, but we do have lots of ways to affect the visibility of certain instances or classes such that only you have to be a developer in this namespace to be able to see it. So it still lets you have a lot of utility in how you manage things, but no, not globally using RBAC.
Yeah. I think there was one more question up here. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And how do you see the update operation of the service instance? It's more about updating between the plans or updating the instance itself? What are the use cases with updates?
Yeah, so you can upgrade just from plans. Say, for example, you have the free tier, and then you want to get to something more exciting. But we also have the ability to just execute our actions on that service instance. So, for example, maybe I want to scale, or I need to be able to do backup and recovery, things like that. Those are exposed through Service Catalog thanks to the OSB API. So it is consistent across brokers. You can do that and get into those actions. We don't have nifty like demo-y stuff. Like if you want to do that, it's kind of a little less easy to access from the CLI.
Are up to the brokers themselves to implement. Like they have to implement backup and restore on the database.
Yeah.
The generic use case that is supported is upgrading between plans. So yeah, the sort of case. Like I have a little database, I want to upgrade it to a big database. Like that's what you would do.
Yeah. So if you'd like to contribute, we would love to have the ability to more easily trigger these actions and be able to manage them and monitor them from, say, SVCAT, but we're not there yet.
Okay, does that answer your question? Does anybody else? Just as an aside, I don't know when this is actually over, but...
I think right now, actually.
Are there any plans or anything to have this, to have this also integrated in OpenShift as a service catalog or something?
So neither of us are from Red Hat, but I believe it already is included in OpenShift. I mean, for quite a while, is my understanding. Like months, if not years. Right?
Yeah, because OpenShift is Kubernetes. So yeah. As long as it allows aggregated API servers, whatever version of OpenShift is okay with that, then you can use Service Catalog.
When you talked about the upgrade, presumably that's still capability that's implemented at the broker, and you're just invoking that capability. So like when you're upgrading from a free to a paid tier of a service.
Yeah, so in OSBAPI terms, that would be upgrading the plan that your service instance has attached to it. And yeah, that goes through the broker. That's a specific part of the spec that allows that to happen. But that's like a mandatory part of the spec, so every broker allows that kind of upgrade. But like the backup and restore, that kind of thing is more specific, so not every broker would support that. Anyone else?
I think we've hit time.
We're just about out of time. So
I'll be hanging around afterwards in the back if you'd all like to chat more, or maybe you want to contribute, chat with me. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming.